Hi guys, so in today's video we are going to be creating a red blood cell scene, and to start we are going to have to create our first red blood cell. So to help you model the red blood cell, you need to understand the structure or the shape, the basic shape of a red blood cell. So in mammals, red blood cells are typically shaped as biconcave discs, meaning they have flattened and depressed centers with dumbbell-shaped cross sections and torus-shaped rims on the edge of the disc. So you have to keep this in mind as you begin modeling your basic red blood cell. So to get started on our red blood cell, we will start by selecting our default cube, hitting Ctrl+3, adding a subdivision modifier, then scaling down the z-axis to about there. We will then get into edit mode, hit 3 to select the faces, select the top face and the bottom face, and press I to inset to right about there. We then scale down the z-axis with the selected faces, of course. Scale down the z-axis, thus creating that flattened, depressed center. That should be fine. So we hit 2 to get into edge select mode, add a loop cut right across, and scale that outwards. To right about there. So our red blood cell is already taking some shape, right? And from there, we can get out of edit mode, shade smooth, and there you have it. That's your basic, very, very basic red blood cell structure. Now that we have completed the basic structure of our red blood cell, we can actually go back into edit mode and click transparent and select the top face and maybe move that down just a little bit. So G, and move that along the z-axis, just slightly down there. And the bottom face, G, and move that along the x-axis upwards. Just giving us that deeper, flattened center that we're looking for. Get out of edit mode, get out of transparent mode, and we can get into our modifiers tab, adding a little deformity to the cell. And this is because in as much as red blood cells are biconcave, they're by no means perfect. So they do still possess some deformities. And if we want to be or get close to realism, we need to add some of those deformities to our cells. So we will start by adding a simple deform modifier, then hitting taper. We can reduce that just a little bit, maybe up to 3.85. That's fine, along the x-axis. We can actually, in the subdivision, increase the render levels to about 4 in the final render. And then after the simple deform modifier, we add a displace modifier. This will blow it up, but no problem. We can actually start by reducing the strength of our deform modifier to about 0.1. 0.1 should be good. And then add a new texture. Change the type to clouds and can increase that to about 0.5. 0.5. That looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. Not too perfect, not too deformed, just enough. adds to that extra realism that we're looking for. So to add more realism to our render, we can duplicate the first red blood cell maybe about 2 times to create slightly different variations of the first one, because they're not all the same shape, the same size. And so we just want to add variations of our red blood cell. So we can Shift D, duplicate, and move that along the x-axis. And then we can also duplicate another one, move that along the x-axis. There we go. We can actually rename these just so it's easy to identify them. Red blood cell, RBC1, then RBC2. We can even go as far as putting these in a collection so that when we are rendering them in the particle emitter, we can just render them as a collection and not individually. Great. So now what we want to do is give them somewhat of their own personality. So we can select perhaps the second red blood cell and maybe add a different type of deform. We can add a twist to that. We can twist that along the x-axis and give it maybe an angle of about 47, maybe 47. See how that looks? We can actually increase that a little bit. Great, looks pretty good. And here in the displace modifier, we can decrease the strength to 0.3 and the mid-level to about 0.7. Just giving it a different look compared to the first one that we had. For the second one, we can also add twist deformity of about, say, -61, maybe along the y-axis. -76 would be fine as well. And in the displacement, or in the displace modifier, pardon, we can actually give it maybe 0.03. And the mid-level 3.34 or 0.05. I think that looks pretty good so far. So we have our 3 red blood cells that we will use when we get to emitting them as particles. Okay, so now that we have our red blood cells, we can select these and move them off to the side while we work on our particle emitter. So we will start by inserting a cube. We can actually scale that ×2. Maybe even scale that along the y-axis. Maybe a little along the x-axis as well. That's fine. We can rename this RBC emitter. Go into the Particles tab, click Add Particle, and You can start by reducing the particle number to about 400, and the frame start can be 1. And here in the source, we can choose to emit from the volume and not from the faces. So we can then come down, let me make this a little bigger. We can come here into the render properties, click render as the selection, and we will then pick the selection that we have, the red blood cells, RBCs. Click that. Then in the viewport display, we can choose to not show the emitter, as well as in the render to not show the emitter. There we go, there we have it. So now we have our red blood cells just floating around in space, but it doesn't look so natural. So what we're gonna do is click or select rotation and keep this as is, and then we can choose to randomize the orientation of each emitted particle or each emitted red blood cells in this situation. So here we have it looking a little more natural. So after getting that set up, we want to reduce our gravity down to 0 and our force down to 0 as well, because we don't want to play this animation and they fall down. We kind of want them floating around in the same space, right? So we reduce our gravity and our force to 0. Then we go into the physics tab, add a force field, and reduce the strength to -200 and the flow to about 0.1. Then we can also edit the wind factor to about 0.6. Okay, so now that we have that set up, we will go back to our particles tab, and in the physics section, we'll change our physics type to fluid, increase our mass to 10 kg. Then in the stiffness, reduce that to about 0.5. In the viscosity, increase that to 10. And the buoyancy can remain at 0. In the forces section, Brownian can be increased up to about 10. Drag, bump it up all the way up to 1. And the drag can come up to about 0.99. Then in the advanced section, we can increase the repulsion factor all the way up to 2. The stiff viscosity can be bumped up all the way up to about 1.2. And we can actually deselect the factor stiff viscosity here. In the interaction radius, we can increase this up to about 1.5, right about so. About 1.5 will be fine. And the rest density can reduce all the way to 0. So you can change or edit the settings to whatever you feel like, but because we are going to be, for the sake of this video, we're going to only be creating a still image and not an animation, I think this should be fine, and then you can pick from whichever frame you like. So the movement is very, very subtle and not too obvious, but it's great for still images because then you can just pick whatever frame you prefer and then decide to render that. So for this section, I think we're actually done. Okay, now that we have our basic setup, we can start by aligning the camera to a view or an angle that we'd like to render from. So I just do that by selecting the camera, locking it to view, and then picking an angle that I would like to render from. This seems pretty good. think I'll go with that. If you need to change it, you can always change it later. But just to get an idea of what you're going to be, or how it's going to look and what you would like to render. Okay, so now that we have our basics set up, we can click out the camera and start shading or adding materials to our red blood cells. So we can move this up just a little bit, go into the shading editor or the shader editor, and pick a slightly red color. I already have a color that I can use, and I'm going to use A3, 2, 6, 2, 8. I found that this works best for me. If you have anything else that you like to use, that's fine too. This just looks and works much better for me. And you can increase the roughness to about 8.6 and reduce the IRO to 1.23 and the alpha 0.730. So for the subsurface division, we can actually choose the Christensen Burley. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but I think I got that. And increase the weight up to about 0.133. That for me just gives me like a better subsurface, especially when rendering in cycles. And you will see that when we finish with the render. And the scale can go up to 0.05. I think that should be good for the materials. Nothing too crazy here. So if we're going to the materials tab, this is how it looks. It's looking pretty good so far. So now what we need to do is go into lighting. So we can delete this, remove this light, and add our own. We can add a sun. Move that up and then go into the render view. Now we're in Eevee, so we'd have to change that to cycles to see that a little bit better. And I just don't think the sun is giving me the lighting that I would like. So maybe I'll change this. I'll go back in the lighting tab, change this to a spotlight, move it along the y-axis, and point it towards the camera, or rotate it rather towards the camera. So now that we have this lighting set up, we can increase our power to 5,000 watts and perhaps maybe increase the spot size, the radius of the lighting. No, maybe that's too bright. We can just leave it down to 0 for now. And the spot size, we can reduce that to about this much, just so it's a little bit more focused. And we can even move that down a little bit. You can adjust this to whatever you like or whatever you prefer. It's not really, it doesn't really matter at this point. So somewhere up to here should be fine. And still adjusting. All right. Okay, so now we sort of have our basic, very, very basic lighting. We can actually go into the world environment and change this to a really, really deep red. Something like that would be fine. Any deep red color. And then we click on, go back to the shader editor, click world, and so I ended up doing the remainder of the project off of camera, but this is what I ended up with. So I will start from the camera setup. So obviously I had, or at least the world setup, I set up the camera to a view that I like, and then I ended up adding a world texture, or at least a world environment, added this deep red color, then used the nodes, geometry shader nodes as well, and added a sky texture with Nishita as the sky type, and these settings right here, which you can copy if you like, and the background color strength of 0.8. So that was it for the world color environment texture. Then I ended up adding another cube because I thought it was a little bit boring, right? When you render, it's just very plain, light, a camera, and some red blood cells. I didn't really want that. So I ended up adding a cube, which is this one that you see here, the rays cube, just to add some godlike rays. So what I did with this one was I just added a regular cube, deleted the principled BSDF shader, and then added a volume scatter node and connected the volume to the volume of the material output, changed the density to 0.03 and the anisotropy to 0.99. And there you have it. In the camera view, this is what you get. These settings can always be tweaked, of course, to whatever you like, whatever style you like. This is just what I thought looked really good, looked really cool. To add, I included an area light, which has a power of 20 watts and a size of 4.39 meters and a spread of 165. This was just because it was a little too dark and I wanted some illumination from the top or from the other side. So it kind of gave me this look. So yeah, so we've come to the end of our video and this is what the final render will look like. If you perhaps like the video or have any questions, just let me know in the comment section below and I'll be sure to get back to you. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Kindly like and subscribe if you want. Thanks. Bye.